Crowdfunding can be a bit of a tricky beast. On the one hand, it can allow people to gain financial backing for a fledgling business, helping them to get a product out into the world that may never have seen the light of day if it had been left to those grumps down at the bank. It isn't without its risks though, for both the crowdfundee and the crowdfunders. Failing to reach your target can be horribly disappointing, and even if you do manage to garner enough support to get your idea off the ground, it might not turn out to be that good once fans get their hands on it. For today's list, we're looking at some of the biggest games industry crowdfunding flops, whether they failed to ever materialize due to a lack of interest or development hell, or were just utter tosh once they did release. They're welcome here. I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are 10 video game crowdfunding campaigns that were massive failures. Number 10. Clang. Here at Team TripleJump, we like to do everything in our power to ensure that we're serving you the hottest, freshest facts around, but we also try to keep things light and entertaining for you guys. If we just told you things as they were with no fluff, then you lot wouldn't have much fun. Clearly, developer Subutai Corporation didn't share our views, which is probably part of the reason why Clang didn't go down very well with players. The Kickstarter for Clang launched in June 2012 and promised players an authentic sword-fighting experience. It quickly amassed over $500,000, and in April 2013, backers got to play the demo. Sadly, the devs had focused too heavily on making Clang historically accurate, so whilst it had some inventive mechanics, it just wasn't all that much fun to play. Designer Neil Stevenson did respond to backers' feedback, but in September 2013 the project was put on hold whilst the devs tried to secure additional funding. Unfortunately, said funding never materialized, and so the team decided to move on to other things. Apologies were made, refunds were given, and ultimately, Clang was cancelled. You might say that the project was a real clanger. I'm here all week. Number 9. Fur Fun. There's nothing wrong with a new video game drawing inspiration from others. After all, video game designers love video games, and so it's likely that bits of those they've enjoyed will make it into their own work. Where it becomes a problem, though, is when a game ends up being a complete rip-off of another, and in the case of Fur Fun, an inferior one. In late 2016, developer Doki Camp launched a Kickstarter for their game Q-Pie Jazzy. The title was set to be a 3D platformer in the style of Banjo-Kazooie, but when the public didn't react well to how the game looked, the money failed to come rolling in and the studio's goal was never reached. Still, the developer wasn't about to let a failed Kickstarter stand in their way, so they instead turned to Steam Early Access, releasing their game under the name Fur Fun. Something fishy was afoot though, and it wasn't our furry friend's lunch, let me tell you. Players immediately noticed that Fur Fun bore an uncanny resemblance to Banjo-Kazooie, including one level that players insisted was ripped from nuts and bolts. Further digging even revealed that Banjo-Kazooie sound files had been used in the game. The cheek! In the end, the game was removed from Steam, which goes to show that cheaters, as in the animal, never prosper. Again, all week, guys. Number 8. Night Trap Revamped. If you were around in the early 90s, then it's likely you'll remember Night Trap, the FMV boo movie style spook fest that had various special interest groups clutching their pearls. It focused on a group of college girls who, unbeknownst to them, decided to throw their slumber party in a house infested with vampires, and it was left up to the players to trigger traps to prevent the girls from getting hurt. It was campy and silly, but to be blunt, the controversy surrounding Night Trap was far more interesting than the game itself. Still, it had its fans, which is presumably why a Kickstarter campaign was launched to remaster it. Backers were promised an HD copy of the game on their platform of choice, along with a whole bunch of other goodies depending on which tier they pledged at. However, things started to unravel when players started actually thinking about how much money the campaign was asking for. Some thought that the $330,000 goal was ridiculously high and wondered what the devs were planning on spending the money on, whilst others were concerned that it was nowhere near enough to cover the costs of distributing physical copies of the game. Ultimately, the devs were unable to assuage anyone's concerns, and the campaign only ended up raising about 10% of its goal. Number 7. Code Hero. Coding is a really useful skill to have, especially in today's job market, but oh boy or girl or other is it dull to learn. Designer Alex Peake clearly recognized this when he tried to get Code Hero off the ground, though rather than soaring to great heights, the game somewhat crashed and burned. Had it been successful, Code Hero would have allowed players to learn how to write programming languages through the use of a code gun. It's an interesting concept and could have been a path to learn a useful skill in a fun way, but unfortunately things didn't exactly go to plan. Development began on Code Hero in 2011, but once the Kickstarter campaign had concluded, Peake hired a development team to work on the game, and by October 2012 they'd run out of money. What followed was a series of delays, a failure to deliver backer rewards, and a serious lack of communication from the devs. Backers went for months on end without an update, and the situation got so dire that some threatened to sue. According to the Primer Labs website, version 0.5 of Code Hero is coming soon, though if I were you, I wouldn't hold your breath. Number 6. The Stomping Land. We come now to a game that not only reached its funding goal, but actually released and on time. You might be wondering what the heck such a game is doing on this list, so allow me to illuminate things for you. In May 2013, developer Alex Fundora launched a Kickstarter for The Stomping Ground, a survival game in which players took on the role of tribespeople on an island and battled against dinosaurs and each other. Sounds great, right? In fact, it sounds a great deal like Ark Survival Evolved, which didn't release until 2017, so why have we heard so much about Ark and nothing about The Stomping Land? Put simply, the devs sort of just gave up on it, really. Upon its release in 2014, players criticized The Stomping Land for its clunky gameplay and the number of bugs they were encountering. Various updates were planned throughout 2014 and 2015, but shortly after launch, Fundora and developer Supercrit just stopped providing them. Allegedly, Fundora had taken the money and ran, leaving players with a janky, unfinished game and some of his devs without pay. The game was removed from Steam in February 2015, and Fundora finally addressed backer concerns in May 2022. Better late than never, I suppose. Number 5. Star Citizen. It isn't uncommon for games to face long, drawn-out development periods, but if you've had a game in progress for over a decade with no release date in sight, then it might be worth giving it up as a bad job. Despite being announced in 2012 and having raised over $400 million through various crowdfunding campaigns, there still seems to be no end in sight for the development of Star Citizen, the space trading and combat simulator from Cloud Imperium Games. If Star Citizen does ever see release, it will allegedly have a number of vast star systems and planets for players to explore, ship-to-ship combat, a full campaign, and much more besides. It's a hugely ambitious project, which is seemingly the main reason why the game is yet to launch. However, the lengthy delays are only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the controversy surrounding Star Citizen. Not only have backers not been able to play the full game despite pledging anywhere up to 10 years ago, but they've also had an absolute nightmare trying to get refunds. There's also been a huge backlash over the game's ship marketplace, which charges players copious amounts of real-world money for in-game items. Call us pessimistic, but if the game does ever come out, we can't help but feel like it'll be No Man's Sky all over again. Number 4. Ant Simulator. To say that the development, or lack thereof, of Ant Simulator was a bit of a mess is something of an understatement. Frankly, it was a complete plops show. As the name suggests, Ant Simulator was set to simulate what it was like to be an ant, something that I'm sure we've all wondered about at some point in our lives. A Kickstarter was launched in May 2014 to help with the costs of developing the game, plus a load of game development tutorials, and this ended up raising just over $4,000. Things seemed to be going well, and throughout 2014 and 2015 a number of updates were posted on the Kickstarter page, which included some of the promised tutorials. However, behind the scenes, things were not going to plan, and in February 2016, lead programmer Eric Tereshinski posted a video to YouTube, one that told of greed and betrayal on the part of his two ex-business partners. According to Tereshinski, little of the $4,000 of Kickstarter money had gone into developing Ant Simulator and had instead been spent by his partners on everything from booze to strippers. To add insult to injury, the contract between the trio meant that Tereshinski couldn't even forge ahead alone, and so Ant Simulator was ultimately cancelled. Number 3. Coleco Chameleon. If there's a bare minimum standard that we here at Team TripleJump expect from a games console, it would probably be that it isn't held together with duct tape. Call us demanding, if you will. Clearly, the folks behind the Coleco Chameleon didn't share our high standards, though, as evidenced by the failed console. Had it ever made it to market, the Coleco Chameleon would have been a cartridge-based console that aimed to remind players of the good old days of retro gaming. It wouldn't need firmware or software updates and would play oldie-style games right out of the box. An Indiegogo campaign was set up, and straight away alarm bells began ringing in gamers' heads. There was no prototype, which was part of the reason that the team was requesting almost $2 million. The specs kept changing, and the cost of the console was set to be a minimum of $300. Still, the team forged ahead and showed off a working sample at the New York Toy Fair in January 2016. The only problem with that was that the console on show was literally an SNES taped inside an Atari Jaguar shell. Unsurprisingly, things went downhill very quickly, and Coleco Holdings withdrew their support from the project shortly after the fiasco. Number 2. Godus. The story of Godus is something of a cautionary tale of the dangers of over-promising and under-delivering. In late 2012, Peter Molyneux and his studio 22 Cans launched a Kickstarter campaign to help fund Godus, and by December 2012, the £450,000 goal had been reached. Meanwhile, 22 Cans' other game, Curiosity What's Inside the Cube, was keeping players busy by having them chip away at layers of a digital cube with the promise of a grand prize should they reach the centre. When Edinburgh resident Brian Henderson reached the middle, he was promised a share of Godus' profit and dominion over the game. Molyneux touted Godus as the ultimate god game, and it was released into early access in September 2013. It was missing a number of features promised throughout the Kickstarter campaign, and unsurprisingly, backers were upset. According to those on the inside, the PC version of Godus was never the priority, and the studio's focus had always been squarely on the freemium version for mobile. Molyneux, of course, disputes these claims. At the time of writing, Godus is still in early access. The promised share of the profits located at the center of the cube have never been paid out, supposedly because there aren't any, and Molyneux is hard at work on an NFT game. Just when we think he couldn't sink any lower. Number 1. Ouya. These days, the console market is very much cornered by Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, and it's fair to say that it would take something mighty special to measure up to the likes of the PlayStation, Xbox, or Switch. Unfortunately, the Ouya didn't have what it takes. The Ouya was announced in July 2012 as a console for the more casual gamer. Alongside the announcement came a Kickstarter campaign to raise $950,000 towards the development of the console. Within 8 hours, the goal had been reached, and by the time the campaign ended, over $8.5 million had been contributed by backers. It was shipped to those who had pledged in March 2013 and became available to the public in June of the same year. The unit was met with much criticism, with reviewers taking aim at its subpar controller as well as its connectivity and stuttering issues, and the fact that there just weren't that many games to play. In the end, only around 200,000 Ouya units were ever sold, and in 2015, Razer bought the software assets and discontinued the console. They provided support until June 2019, at which point they closed down the Ouya storefront, rendering the consoles useless. You know, more so than they had been before.